I worked the night shift at the front desk of the Cecil Hotel back in 2013. It wasn't glamorous work, but it paid the bills. Most nights were quiet, a few travelers from out of town, some longer-term residents who kept to themselves. The place had a reputation that was hard to shake, stories about its past, the kinds of guests it attracted. But by then, we'd grown used to it. The creaks in the walls, the distant hum of the elevators, they became a kind of soundtrack to those long hours before dawn. I first saw Elisa the night she checked in. She came in alone, small suitcase in tow, her hair tucked under a wool hat even though it wasn't that cold. She was polite, a little shy maybe, but there was nothing unusual about her. She gave her name, paid for a few nights, and asked if there was a map of the city. That was it. Just another guest passing through. Over the next couple of days, I'd see her come and go. She always wore the same dark jacket and moved like she was in a hurry, not rushed exactly, but always with purpose. Sometimes she'd stop by the front desk to ask about bus schedules or if there was a place nearby to get good coffee. She had this way of looking around, like she was always scanning the corners of the lobby, like she was searching for something. Or maybe someone. There was nothing that stuck out then. No reason to worry. A few days later, I noticed she hadn't been by for a while. The housekeepers said she wasn't answering the door when they tried to clean her room. That happened sometimes. People would check in and then vanish into the city for a while. No one thought much of it. But then the manager asked me to check the security logs. Just a routine thing, he said. I sat there in the little office behind the front desk, scrolling through grainy footage. At first, it was nothing, lobby shots, empty hallways, the elevator going up and down. But then I saw her, Elisa, standing in the elevator like she was trying to disappear into the corner. Her eyes were wide, darting back and forth, and she kept pressing all the buttons on the panel like she couldn't decide where to go. She'd peek out into the hallway, then jump back inside. Over and over. I remember leaning closer to the screen, trying to see if someone was following her. But there was no one. Just empty carpet and flickering lights. She looked terrified. Or maybe confused. I couldn't tell. She was moving her hands like she was talking to someone, but no one was there. And then she just slipped out of view. That footage stuck with me. I must have watched it 20 times, trying to make sense of it. In a place like the Cecil, you get used to odd things, but there was something about her that felt different. It wasn't just fear. It was like she knew something the rest of us didn't. I told the manager, and he said he'd keep an eye on it. But the days went by, and there was still no sign of her. No checkout. No calls. Nothing. Then the complaints started. The water pressure dropped on the upper floors. People said it tasted strange, metallic. Some said it smelled off. Maintenance went up to check the tanks on the roof. That's when they found her. It didn't feel real when I heard. The manager just said they'd found a body. He didn't say her name at first, but I knew. I knew before the police showed up, before the yellow tape went across the lobby, before the reporters started crowding outside. Elisa. They pulled her out of that tank in the middle of the day, sirens echoing off the buildings. I remember seeing the firefighters on the roof, the way they moved carefully, like they were afraid to disturb the silence. Word spread fast. Guests started packing their bags, some of them too shaken to speak. And me? I kept thinking of that elevator footage, her face frozen in that look of fear, and wondering how she ended up there. The police didn't have answers right away. No one did. They sealed off the roof, took statements from everyone who worked there. I told them everything I could remember, but it didn't feel like enough. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat behind the desk, watching the lobby monitors, listening to the hum of the vending machine. And I kept thinking, how does someone go from pressing buttons in an elevator to floating in a water tank above the city? And why did no one see it coming? After they pulled Elisa's body out of that tank, the hotel felt different. The noise from the street below didn't drown out the quiet that had settled in. Guests checked out in droves. Some didn't even bother to ask for refunds. They just wanted to be somewhere else. For those of us who worked there was no leaving. We had bills to pay, families to feed. So we stayed behind the desk, answering the phones, trying to act like everything was normal. But it wasn't. I kept thinking about her last night in the hotel. The way she pressed every button in that elevator. The way she looked into the hallway like she was sure someone was there. I asked myself over and over, did I miss something? Did I see her with anyone? But the answer was always the same, no. The police talked to everyone. They asked about her behavior, if she'd seemed off, if she'd mentioned being afraid. I told them what I knew, that she was quiet, polite, always alone. I didn't know about the elevator footage until the day they found her. That was the first time I realized just how scared she must have been. They said she was a college student from Canada, traveling alone. She posted photos of her trip online, little things like coffee shops and old buildings. She seemed happy in those photos, like she was making a memory for herself. But something changed in that hotel. They checked the locks on the roof access. Said it was supposed to be locked. Only staff had the keys. But there was a way up if you really wanted to get there, the fire escape, an old door that didn't always shut right. No one thought much about it before. Now it was all anyone could talk about. The police didn't find any signs of foul play. No bruises, no cuts, nothing that said someone forced her in there. It was like she just climbed in herself. But that didn't make sense. Who would do that? The news was all over it. Reporters camped outside, trying to catch anyone coming or going. They wanted answers we didn't have. Some of them even tried to sneak in to film the tanks, like seeing the place might make it make sense. But it didn't. I started noticing things I hadn't before. Little details. Guests would mention strange noises at night, footsteps in the hallway when no one was there, doors closing by themselves. The Cecil had always had stories like that. Ghost stories, urban legends. I never believed any of them. But after Elisa, it was hard not to wonder. The manager tried to keep everything quiet. He said it was a tragic accident, nothing more. But no one believed that, not really. Not with that footage. Not with the way she looked in that last glimpse of her, eyes wide, back pressed against the corner of the elevator. Some nights, after my shift ended, I'd take the stairs instead of the elevator. Couldn't bring myself to step inside it alone. I'd see her in my mind every time those doors closed, the way she hesitated, the way she moved like she was trying to disappear. And always, the same question in my head. What was she running from? As the days turned into weeks, the police came and went. They took the tapes, the logs, every scrap of information they could find. But they didn't have much to work with. No forced entry. No struggle. Just a young woman alone in a place that never felt safe, even when it was. People started talking, not just in the hotel, but all over the neighborhood. The Cecil had always drawn the curious, the desperate, and the unlucky. It wasn't the kind of place you stayed for the views. The building had a history, and everyone knew it. Suicides, overdoses, things that never made the news but still clung to the walls like a stain. They said Elisa must have been haunted by something. That maybe the hotel itself had gotten inside her head. I didn't know what to think. I'd worked there long enough to hear the stories. Guests waking up in the night, feeling hands around their throat. Shadows in the corners of rooms. Most of it was nonsense, drunk talk from tourists looking for a thrill. But after Elisa, I wasn't so sure. The maintenance guys said the tanks had always been a problem. They were old, rusted in places, barely up to code. I remember thinking how easy it would be for someone to slip and fall in. But that didn't explain the footage. That didn't explain the way she moved, frantic, desperate, like she was trying to escape something only she could see. I kept going back to the video. Even when I wasn't at work, I'd watch it on my phone, frame by frame. The way she pressed her back against the wall. The way she stepped into the hallway and then back again. I thought if I looked close enough, maybe I'd see what she saw. But it was always the same, an empty hallway. A young woman alone. The coroner's report came out not long after. Accidental drowning, it said. No drugs in her system. No alcohol. No sign of a struggle. It was the kind of answer that only raised more questions. How do you accidentally drown in a tank you're not supposed to be able to reach? Some guests said they'd seen her in the days before she disappeared. She was quiet, kept to herself, but they all said the same thing. She looked lost. Like she was trying to find something in a place that had nothing to give. There were theories, of course. Some said she was running from someone, that she'd seen something she shouldn't have. Others said it was all in her head, that the isolation of traveling alone had pushed her over the edge. I didn't know her well enough to say, but I'd seen enough to know she was scared. After the police packed up and the reporters left, the hotel tried to go back to normal. But it never really did. There was a heaviness to the air, like the building itself was holding its breath. The guests who stayed were different too, more cautious, more watchful. They asked about the elevators, about the tanks. Some of them didn't want to hear the answers. I stayed behind the front desk, night after night, listening to the hum of the vending machines and the creak of the old pipes. I kept waiting for something, a noise, a shadow, but nothing ever came. Just that silence, heavy and final. And in the back of my mind, the same thought. Maybe the scariest thing wasn't what she saw. Maybe it was that no one else saw it at all. I'd worked at the Cecil long enough to know the rooftop was off limits. The door to the stairs had a heavy padlock, one that clanged every time it shut. Officially, only maintenance had the keys. But there were always ways around it if you knew where to look. The fire escape ran up the side of the building like a rusted backbone, clinging to the bricks with bolts that looked older than the city itself. Most people didn't even notice it. But some guests, the restless, the curious, they'd find their way up. I'd seen them before, taking selfies with the skyline, laughing at how easy it was to climb past the sign that said, "No entry." Eliza must have found it too. That was the only explanation that made sense. She'd climbed out a window, slipped past the sign, and made her way up. Maybe she wanted to see the city from up there. Maybe she wanted to feel like she was somewhere else. I've thought about that so many times. But the tanks, those tanks were different. They were old, heavy metal, with lids that clanged shut so hard they'd echo through the whole rooftop. Getting inside one of them wasn't easy. You'd have to climb up a narrow ladder bolted to the side, then push the lid open from above. And once you were inside, there was no way out. The police said there were no signs of anyone else up there. No footprints but hers. No fingerprints on the ladder or the lid. Nothing. Just her. I remember when they drained the tanks, how the water came out dark and slow. People had been drinking it, showering in it for days. No one knew. Some guests checked out the second they found out, their faces pale and sick. Others just stared at the news crews on the sidewalk, trying to understand how it had happened. We never saw Eliza again, of course. But I saw her in my mind every time I walked past the elevator. Every time the doors closed and I was alone with my thoughts, I'd see her pressed into the corner, her hands moving in that strange, jerky way. It became an obsession for me, trying to understand. I'd read everything I could find online, watched every clip, every theory. Some people said it was a ghost, that the hotel's history had finally swallowed her up. Others said she'd been playing a game, some kind of ritual, an urban legend come to life. I didn't believe any of that. I believed what I saw on the footage, a young woman who looked more afraid than I'd ever seen anyone look, staring into an empty hallway like she knew something was coming. After the funeral, her family took her belongings. A suitcase. A few postcards. Nothing out of the ordinary. Just the things of someone who didn't expect to die in a hotel room far from home. I stayed at the desk, night after night, the way I always did. But I stopped taking the elevator after that. Even if I was tired. Even if my legs ached. I'd take the stairs, listening to the creak of the metal steps, the hush of the old carpet. Because I knew what I'd see if those elevator doors opened. And I didn't want to see it again. As the weeks turned into months, the story of Elisa Lam slowly faded from the news. The reporters packed up their cameras, the police stopped coming around, and the city moved on. But inside the hotel, nothing really felt the same. Some guests asked about her, mostly the ones who'd read about it online. They wanted to see the elevator, the rooftop, the place where she'd spent her final moments. The manager always told them no, said it was out of respect, but I think it was more about trying to keep the last bit of normalcy we had. But no matter how much he tried, there was no going back. The footage of Eliza in that elevator had gone viral, and it never stopped playing in the back of my mind. I saw it every time I closed my eyes. The way she moved, like she was talking to someone only she could see. I started to notice the little things more. The hum of the vending machine in the lobby. The rattle of the pipes in the walls. I'd worked there long enough to know every sound the building made. But after Eliza, every noise felt like a question I didn't want to answer. The guests changed too. Fewer tourists, more people who wanted to see the place for themselves. They'd ask in hushed voices about the tank, the water, the girl who never came back. I'd give them the same line every time, "There's nothing to see." It was a tragedy, that's all. But even I didn't believe that. I kept thinking about the night before they found her. I'd been on shift, same as always, watching the monitors, counting the hours until dawn. I'd seen her name in the check-in book, her room number written in neat letters. I hadn't thought twice about it then. Now, I'd give anything to go back to that moment, to do something, anything, to change what happened. Some nights I'd find myself up on the roof, standing by the tanks. I told myself I was just checking the locks, making sure everything was secure. But really, I think I was trying to understand, trying to see what she saw in those last moments. The tanks were still there, empty now, their lids sealed tight with heavy chains. The city stretched out in every direction, lights and cars, and people who'd never know her name. Up there, it felt like the world was holding its breath, like the answers were just out of reach. But no matter how long I stared into those tanks, I never found them. And maybe that was the worst part. Because no matter how much I wanted to understand, the only person who could tell us what happened was gone. The seasons changed, but the memory of that night never really faded for me. The hotel went on like it always had. New guests, new stories, but always the same uneasy hush in the hallways. I kept working the night shift. It felt like the only thing I could do. The days blurred together, the hours stretching long and empty. Sometimes, when the lobby was quiet, I'd find myself thinking about Eliza. About how a girl who came here just to see the city ended up in a place no one was supposed to go. I never saw her ghost, if that's what you're wondering. No footsteps echoing from the tanks, no cold spots in the elevator. Just silence. A silence so deep it felt like it was holding something I'd never be able to name. The guests who still came asked their questions, but I stopped trying to answer them. The truth was, there wasn't anything left to say. The police called it an accident. The newspapers moved on. But for those of us who stayed behind, it was like a scar you couldn't see, there every time you looked in the mirror. I think about that last moment in the elevator, how she pressed herself into the corner like she was trying to become part of the wall. How she kept peeking out into the hallway, waiting for something that never came. I think about the tanks, how cold the water must have been, how dark. And I think about how alone she must have felt in those final moments. Sometimes I wonder if she knew how it would end. If she understood the way the city could swallow you whole. Or if she was just another person looking for something she couldn't name. The hotel has changed since then. New paint, new furniture. They try to make it look like any other place. But no matter how many times they paint over the walls, the past is still there. In the hum of the pipes, in the flicker of the old lights, in the way the air feels when you're the only one awake at 3 a.m. I've thought about leaving, finding work somewhere else, somewhere that doesn't carry so much history in its walls. But I never do. Maybe I've grown used to the quiet. Or maybe it's because I feel like if I leave, I'll be letting her go for good. And I'm not sure I'm ready for that. I don't know what really happened to Elisa Lam. No one does. Maybe no one ever will. But I know what I saw on that screen. I know the way her fear felt real, how it settled in my chest like a stone I'll carry forever. In the end, maybe that's all we're left with. The questions that never get answered, the stories that never find an ending, and the hope that somehow, somewhere, she found the peace this place could never give her.